Thank you, everyone. Thanks for coming out today. Thank you, Blue Sky, for having me and my work here at your amazing space. I'm really excited to be part of the legacy of showing at Blue Sky just on the eve of your 50th anniversary. Thank you. Thank you to C for helping me conceptualize how all of this was going to work. And thank you, Yu Young and M, for such a warm welcome to Portland. And I just want to give a shout out to my family who came out both from New York and Seattle to see me here today. So that is my sort of Grammy thank you list. Thank you. So this is my first time ever showing the infusion pictures that I've been making for the last 10 years, 11 years. I started making these pictures in 2014 after I was diagnosed with MS. The diagnosis happened quickly. I was living in Detroit with my husband, and I was in a car accident, and my car had been totaled. It was a frightening experience, and 2 weeks later, I had very strange physical symptoms, and about 3 months later, I had my diagnosis. And then everything got a little stranger when I woke up one day and I had extreme double vision, which I didn't really know was possible, and I didn't know if it was ever going to go away. And at that point in time, I hadn't started any regular medical treatment. I was just kind of becoming aware of my new life and what was going to happen, and I ended up moving back to New York, and yada, yada, yada. A lot of things happened. But in that time, I was trying to figure out with my doctor which medication would be the best for me. And it turned out that these monthly infusions were going to be the best path, and that as long as I stayed on the regimen of every 28 days, I had the potential to be free of flares, free of disease progression. It just meant figuring out how to create a life with stability and access to health care and health insurance and a lot of things I had never thought about before at the age of 25. So I had a lot of support both from my husband, my parents, who we moved back in with, and I started working full-time at Storm King Art Center, and every 28 days, when I'd go to the Infusion Center, I would photograph myself. And at that point in time, I wasn't really talking about any of it with anyone. I wasn't talking to my friends about it. I was like telling people here and there when I was ready that this was going on in my life. And I got a lot of strange reactions, like, you know, my grandmother died of MS, or how long do they expect you to live, or just questions that made it clear that no one really knew anything about what this is, or what they did know was based on a previous ingrained narrative that people have about what it looks like to be a person with MS. And the truth is that for the number of people who have this illness, that is the number of experiences there are. No two experiences are the same. They're all different. And so for the first, in 2014 through 2019, I was mainly photographing with my cell phone camera, looking at the site of the IV, where it was going. And then in 2019, my daughter was born, who's here today, and I had a flare where my arm turned into like a cement feeling limb where I couldn't use my hand, and I needed a nurse to come to our apartment to give me, at that point, I think it was steroids. I needed a steroid injection. And I was holding my infant child in one arm, and I was feeding her a bottle with my mouth to her mouth, and the IV was in one arm, and I was like, what does this even look like? Because what it felt like was nuts. And so I set up my camera on a tripod, which I hadn't done really in a long time. And there was an app on my phone where I could sync my digital camera to the cell phone so it could operate like a remote. And I took a lot of pictures. I took like 240 pictures. And it changed everything, because up until that point, I was only making vertical pictures. And I had been using my camera, after my experience with double vision, I had been using my camera almost like an assistive device where I could photograph things the way I'd always done, but I could also use the camera to see things that my vision had been doubling. And it was really at that point where I used automatic focus for the first time because I couldn't see, so it really felt like my relationship with the camera changed because I needed it to do things that I'd never needed before. So after I made those pictures with Anita, I realized like I want to try taking my camera into the Infusion suite with me, because I don't need to be afraid of what people are thinking about me, because everyone is just kind of thinking about themselves in their little suite. And I also felt like super powerful because I just had a baby. So I was like, if I can do that, I can do this. And from 2019 onward, I brought my tripod and my digital camera and my point-and-shoot film camera and my view camera and my medium format camera and my cell phone, and I've just been making these pictures. Each tool has a different aesthetic language. All of these photographs were made with a digital tool. In the last talk, Leo was talking about digital versus film, and I feel like they're just, in my process, they're all part of the same language. They have different, it's like speaking to someone from North Dakota versus speaking to someone from Texas. They have different sort of dialectical styles, but they're all in the same universe together. And I like when I feel frustrated with one tool, I can sort of just pick up a different tool and feel like I'm able to disengage from the frustration that one tool creates and be excited about a different tool. I wanted to share some of the things that I wrote, both for the recording and also for people maybe who haven't taken the time to read this text, because I've spent a lot of time retooling it, and I feel like it's finally in this place where it's true to how I feel about what I've done. Chronic illness is often perceived as a personal misfortune and private matter, making it a taboo to speak publicly about medical diagnoses, symptoms, treatments, and the financial burden of ongoing care. My art practice debunks this notion, transforming the conventional lived experience of illness into a space for creativity, dialogue, and connection. As an artist and patient knowingly living with multiple sclerosis since 2014, I navigate the blurry, layered boundaries between care and dependency amidst vulnerability and agency. The exhibition, Our Body is a Clock, which is this exhibition, is rooted in the rhythm of monthly intravenous immunosuppressive treatments in the Infusion Center. The series transforms moments into meditations on time, care, and survival. The changes to my likeness throughout the series form a clockwork narrative where my body becomes both subject and marker of time's passage. The Infusion Center, where my photographs are situated, is a space of profound contradiction, dominated by medical authority and systemic routines, yet deeply personal and emotionally charged. Reflecting larger societal dynamics of visibility and invisibility, non-normative bodies are often erased or reduced to passive objects of care. Through my images, I claim these spaces, asserting agency, creativity, and humanity. The Infusion Center's cyclical rhythms, measured in drips, waiting, and the beeps of machines, disrupt conventional notions of time and productivity. This alternative timeline mirrors the concept where life unfolds in flexible, nonlinear rhythms shaped by illness. By capturing these moments, I challenge societal ideals of constant productivity and independence, presenting survival as an ongoing lived experience rather than a triumph over illness. Caregiving, particularly as a mother and patient, is central to my work. My images critique cultural expectations around dependency and emotional labor, especially as they relate to women. I explore the power dynamics of medical spaces where authority often reinforces patient vulnerability. Yet my photographs also reveal moments of solidarity, quiet glances, shared gestures that create unspoken networks of empathy and support. And so I transform infusions themselves into fueling resistance and resilience. My work disrupts cultural taboos around illness, celebrating non-normative bodies and fostering new dialogues about the complexities of care, survival, and identity. So I feel really proud of taking this 28-day cycle, and instead of just kind of feeling the sadness and overwhelm that is also part of it, using that time as my time to make my pictures. And the reason I started photographing my hand, 10, 11 years ago was that I wanted to look to the history of photography to try and find examples of artists who had documented themselves and their experience of illness just as an ongoing practice, and I couldn't find that. And it took me a while, 2014 to 2019 to get here, but where I am currently was what I was looking for when I was first diagnosed. How these are made, when I get into the suite, I typically wait, they take my vitals, I set up my tripod, I have a proper remote, and I frame the space where I want to set myself. So I think about what's in the background, what part of the room I want to interact with. The spaces are small. They're like, if I put a little rectangular box around me right here. So it's a really small space. There's not a lot of possibility for movement. Some days I make hundreds of pictures until I feel like maybe I've got something. And some days I make 4. It really depends on the level of energy that day. On this day with the view camera, I had this idea that I was going to make portraits of the nurses, and they put me in a room I'd never been in before. I was further away from everyone else in the Infusion Center than I'd ever been. I don't think any nurses came in that day. And that was the first time my husband came with me. So I took one picture of us with the view camera, and I was exhausted. I was totally exhausted, and I was like, oh, I forgot how labor-intensive this tool is. And then I made some pictures of myself making pictures, and I was really excited because it's like, who is this other person who's there? And in saying that, I'll also say that I don't think about this project as a documentary project. I think of it as an art practice, an art project. I am documenting, but some of the photographs have been, they wouldn't pass muster as journalism. So it's something else. It's the story I want to tell about my experience of this. And as I said, this is my first exhibition of this work, but it's also my first solo exhibition. And so I've spent a lot of time thinking about books and making books, and I've always thought of this as being a book, and I'm working on that. And in the book there is writing, and I'll share some of that. But if anyone has any questions at this point, you can ask, or comments before I start reading again. Yes?
How long is each session in the Infusion Center?
So for all of these, the 28-day infusions were about an hour. But that was after they'd put it up, plug it in, then it would be an hour. Some days it would take an hour to 2 hours to get plugged in. I now am on a different medication, and that medication is every 6 months, but it's about a 7-hour drip. So, yeah. Yes?
What kind of reaction have you gotten from the staff, and has their reactions and perceptions changed over time?
Well, it's kind of sad because the first time I shared any of these pictures publicly, I never saw the staff again after that, because my doctor's response was to try a different treatment totally. And so I didn't end up going back to this infusion center. And it was bittersweet because I'd been going there for so long, and also during the pandemic especially, I saw those people, they were the only people I saw other than my family. But I don't know what their responses were. The security staff would sometimes be like, "Oh yeah, Sarah," when I would come in and I'd not know this person. And I'd be like, "Hi, we haven't met before." And they're like, there's a note that you're the only patient who comes in with a whole camera kit. So there'd be reactions like that, or the nurse who I write about the most is actually not in any of these pictures, and she'd often make comments about what an interesting way to spend your time while you're in here, because you're so focused on this other thing. And then sometimes other patients, because it's curtains that separate, as you can see, sometimes other patients would say, "Are you making a podcast?" Or, things like that. And so it would often become, between the patients, a point of something to talk about that wasn't just this economy of who's more sick. But otherwise, I would ask questions from the nurses, is it okay if I move from this room to that room? Because I always liked the room with the window, because it had the best light. And then there are other pictures that aren't in this exhibition where I would ask them if I could set up the camera in an area of the suite that was all the way across the room, because there would be nobody there. And so I'd have pictures from a different distance. And one day I tried using an on-camera flash, and I didn't ask anybody's permission. And the staff didn't say anything to me about it, but I heard another patient talking about, they're like, "What is that? What is that bright light? It's gonna give me a migraine." And I realized it was just not appropriate. So I think I've always been scared in some way as a photographer of being intrusive on anyone. And yes?
Well, for example, has that healthcare professional been able to view that image?
They haven't, but there's nothing about their identity that's revealed.
Well, that's not what I'm implying. I'm just
Right.
wondering if they get the chance to see it.
They haven't.
Okay, yeah, all right.
But they knew what I was doing. I would always tell them what I was doing.
Yeah, and I'm not doing it out of
Yeah.
any sense of fear or
Yeah.
surveillance or anything. Yeah, sure.
Yeah. They would ask questions about where these pictures would end up. And I would say I don't know, I want to make a book about my experience someday. I might show these in a gallery. And they had awareness of that. Sometimes I would show them pictures that I'd made just on the back of my camera. And sometimes they'd ask me to just photograph them. So I have some pictures of the nurses smiling.
Is there because like in a care facility, like a hospital space, there is this sense of like of course it's because of social stigma, but a sense of like I when I'm carrying a camera into like when I'm receiving my care, there's often this like glares or people's uncomfortable look because like it's sometimes people think it's very personal, and the fear of being recorded that kind of reminds them of their illness in some ways. So how do you navigate like in terms of bringing a camera into this, and how have you ever encountered any like bad experience regarding it?
I haven't. I haven't had any bad experiences, and I'm grateful for that. And I think maybe it's hard to imagine, and I can talk a little bit about what happens when I set the camera up, but I'm never walking around with the camera in front of me. I come in and I put the camera on the tripod, and it's pretty awkward, I think, because it's like, here's the camera and the tripod, and then here's an empty chair. So anyone who walks by and can see me is probably like, that's strange. So it's not this kind of intimidation of like, I have it around me the whole time and I'm walking and I'm looking around, but I'm very purposeful in just making sure my camera bag is kind of discreet, and I go into my suite. Yeah, it's not like a donkey bag or anything. It looks like just a messenger bag. I set it up and I'm just pointing it at things that you could walk by and see me sitting in a chair like this with the camera pointing at me. And so I don't get any of those reactions. It would just be a conversation about, is that a podcast? Or, what are you putting together? And when I would say, I'm interested in having a record of this experience, that would really resonate with people. So I started writing about things people would say to me in the hospital, things that aren't possible to image. When I was invited to submit a full manuscript of pictures and writing a few years ago, and I just wanted to share a few bits and pieces from that draft. I begin monthly fusions of a third-line biologic drug to manage multiple sclerosis in the spring of 2015. The medication is regarded as the most efficacious method of defense from relapse, creating an ongoing state of remission while working to repair lesions that have already laid claim to the myelin of my brain and spinal cord cells. My doctor explains that efficacy is contingent on continued and uninterrupted treatment, and we will try this method of care for a while and see how it goes. I think about the we in his statements, and I wonder if in another context we would be friends. He underscores the medication's ability to produce the desired and intended results require a commitment to the recommended infusion schedule, once every 28 days. He says I'll receive a lot of information in the coming days from the TOUCH program. I ask about another biomedical treatment that I've read about. How long do I commit to this before trying that, or even go medication-free? He replies, let's think of the medication as a boyfriend. If he's good to you, why go changing boyfriends? Rather than orient myself to the cycle of the Earth's moon, I orient myself to the cycle of infusion. What if chronic illness in its many forms, long shrouded and misinterpreted by popular culture, was made public? In the kingdom of the sick, fear, uncertainty, trust, and patience rule over us. From wherever it begins, a photograph ends as a cupped abstraction, the thing capsized by a lens, stripped and projected as an image. The game is the old one of form set against the specific charge and demand of content. Photographers do not expect others to understand this, but for them the process they use is prodigal, addictive, and maddening. On the windowsill of my east-facing medical suite is a small stone with 3 ridges. The flattest of its surfaces is 1/3 the size of my palm. In the center, irrespective of the rock's ridge lines, someone has painted a yellow smiley face. I have been sitting here, looking at that stone without feeling time at all. I ask Nurse C about the stone, and she replies, "A volunteer left it there to bring joy to our patients, to help bring them out of their bodies. Have you heard? The only way to heal is to disassociate." Oftentimes, I cannot trust my body's perception. There's a moment where I settle in and I'm just a blank slate, only a soul. I have no edges, no folds, no creases, no fascia, no brain, no myelin. We're in the infusion suite together. She knits while I pull my phone in and out of my coat pocket from underneath the hospital blanket. I look at my reflection in the black mirrored surface of my phone and imagine my ancestors in Norway, Sweden, Poland, Germany, Russia, looking back at me. My mind wanders as I imagine their difficult circumstances, their abstract genetic blueprints and environmental realities. I think of living with chronic infirmity without the luxury of modern medicine. Mom and I don't talk about much more today. The weather is good, but she says it's too sunny. I tell her my refrigerator is filled with English cucumbers. I think about the day she put me down when I was a baby and never picked me up again. The nurse doesn't introduce herself. She is filling in for Nurse C's shift. She comes around and asks if I need anything. I shake my head. My mom says, "It's my birthday. May I have a Diet Coke?" After a few sips of Coke and a few rows of wool knotted together by large gauge knitting needles, Mom turns to me to say, "Illness is a devil spirit. Through the power of prayer, we can do something about it. Take my hand, let's pray." Yes, please. Sorry.
So this is an ongoing kind of indefinite journey in life that you expect to be on indefinitely in the future.
Mm-hmm.
Do you, as you contemplate, publishing a book or experience, having worked up in places and stuff, does it change how you feel about that future?
No.
Yeah.
No. So I felt like I had a lot of momentum a year ago, and like it was time to sort of put a book board up and say, like, this is the first volume and the process will just continue. I'm just going to continue to do this. And even though I had momentum, I couldn't find the right partner to publish with. And in that process, I decided, like, okay, if this isn't the right time, the work will continue, and I'll just pick up this effort to find someone again in the future. My mentor, who I'm very close with, told me, you can do it now, and then you can redo it again. You can, there's so many possibilities. And so I really like thinking about it as a DJ, where I can make it and remix it and retool it. But I am really eager to start something else. I had told someone on Thursday I really want to photograph other people. because I'm in a really good place physically with my care and stuff. And I want to try photographing other people and making work the way that I had been before all of this began. You know, it kind of made me become a different person, and that's been great. But I want to try doing other things while I'm also doing this. Yes?
How did you choose the photos that you have up here today versus probably the hundreds plus that you have?
Yeah. The count right now, I mean, this is a rounded number, but it's around 12,000. There's a lot, and it's really hard. And typically, I like the narrative inside of a single frame. Sometimes I like the way that I look. Sometimes I really don't like the way that I look. But I just wanted to try something out, and I felt like at Blue Sky I felt empowered to just experiment, and so I kind of chose my favorites for this. Yeah.
How long after photographing do you look at what you made that day? When you get home, the next week, month, like, what's the process of digesting the photos that you made?
Typically, I don't look at them for like 8 months or more. I forget when I started doing this, but I treat my memory cards like film. So I just have them all stored, and so I could fill a memory card and just file it, put it on a computer, and then file the memory card. But it's too painful. I mean, it's a really raw experience. I don't think I have disassociated from the experience, but there's a familiarity to it, but I can't just look at the pictures right after. Usually, I pick one, and there was a time where I was putting one on social media regularly because I was really excited, but I'd find the one and not look at the rest, really. Yes?
Is this the full dynamic range of your camera? I was wondering if you're doing any flattening or if that's just the printing? Or?
It's just the printing. So I chose this paper because I wanted to try. This is a Japanese paper that's matte. It's a very lightweight. I think it's 70 grams. And because it's a matte surface, it's really flattening a lot of the tonal range, and the vibrancy is very muted. I will say that hospital lighting is terrible. The colors are terrible. I love the blue curtain, but that's the curtain that they use only when they're washing the yellow curtain. And so it's not up very much. And also, there was a time where I was trying to color match the curtains, but they're not all the same color. So this one is not the same, literally not the same color as that one. And at that point, I was like, well, it just doesn't matter. But the color range, or I forget the phrasing you just used. The dynamic range, it's very, the camera is very sophisticated. And I'm sure I'm not using it to its full potential. But typically, I don't like to go on a technical level. I don't like to go above 400 ASA because it gets weird after that. So I'm keeping it pretty, I don't know, I think being trained in film and still using film, I'm thinking about it in a very particular way. Yes?
Yeah, I think the paper is really very evocative. It feels like skin. It has this feeling of simultaneously being delicate and tough. And I think the choice of paper adds a lot to one's experience of the picture. It's great.
Thank you. It felt like a real, it felt kind of like a wild choice when I was printing them, because it's really, it's not present right now, and I forgot about it until this very moment, but when the prints came out of the roll printer, or the printer, I could see where the paper was being pushed against the backside. Like the impression, it kind of looked like a bird had walked, a big bird had walked along 3 sections. So it was like strips from the insides of the printer, because the paper's so light, it had made a really strong impression. And I was like, oh, that's just gonna be how it is. But now it's not there. So, yeah, I liked that it was like, because this paper is really delicate, but it's also very strong. Like the fibers of the bamboo and the rice are really strong. And I'd been using it to make these small books. And the company is out of San Francisco. They're called Hiromi. And I was buying sheets of 17 by 19, and then I realized I could buy a 44-inch roll. So I thought I'd give that a shot. And I'll admit that when I came in here and I saw Leah's work in the front, I was like, I made the right choice. I made the right choice, just because the framing is so beautiful. But I think that it's been really impactful to see how this vision I wanted to try of when you walk by it, it'll move like the curtain in the hospital. I do want to try something conventional behind the frame, but it's really special to feel free to try it, because I otherwise wouldn't know.
Yeah, I think the lack of framing and the push pins add a tenderness and will make them way more approachable compared to something in a frame and covered with museum quality glass. And so, so when you mentioned like you kind of took a while before you could start working on the picture that you took, and I wonder, like, when you are documenting these, in some sort, these personal experience can sometimes feel like just reawakening those dusty, far off things, and you suddenly lit a torch in the forest, and all the moss starts to come by again. And so it's like, I know I like sometimes wait a couple months could work, but it also kind of reminds the pain that of that day. So is that something that you will struggle with, or have you yeah?
No, I don't. Sometimes when I try and look at all 12,000, it's just, that becomes like a endurance activity, and I start thinking like, oh, maybe I should work with an editor. But I don't feel the pain. I just kind of feel a real sense of being overwhelmed.
How do you set your focus?
I mean, there are a lot of bad pictures in the 12,000. But I just set it. And sometimes I try using autofocus and other times I don't. But I'm framing the background before I get in front of the camera. And so there are some where I'm not in focus. And those pictures are interesting, but they're something else. Yeah, I mean, I don't emphasize it, but there are a lot of bad pictures in that count. Yeah.
Yeah, but you were referring in the earlier talk, Leah was talking about the difference between digital and film and all that. And I think there's sometimes people are sort of like, and what's the best way to do it? But you have a personal relationship with your equipment, with your materials choices, and you have things, as Dean Arvis said, you have things you want to do, and that has things it wants to do, and you come to a deal together.
Yeah.
And I think the choices that you make as an artist are really tied into what are you trying to accomplish, and what you're trying to accomplish is unique to each individual. So I think the sort of choices that you've made here really make a completely different show than if it was printed and framed like the show up front.
Yeah.
And I think this is a great example to sort of see that it's not just a matter of what's the right way to do it, but it's like, what's the way to do it that brings the most power to the work?
Yeah, I really appreciate that. And I think something, when I really let my mind wander, I'm like, a photograph is the result of 1,000 decisions. And that's not even when you start thinking about presentation. And for everything in this room, all of these pictures, just for an example, the primary question I have when I get into the hospital is like, what is a way I can make pictures that has the least amount of friction in the process of making? And that has led how I've made these pictures probably around year 3 until now. And in some ways, I think that's how I came to this presentation, is that I was curious about the material, and there was no friction in how I was going to get that from my printer here. And after I had the initial shock of the beauty of the framed pieces, I really was able to think, like, what an incredible pairing in many ways. And in one, just to see the contrast of presentation, but also how the two kind of have a really dynamic conversation between them. Because even when Leah was talking about the lack of visibility, there's a huge lack of visibility here too.
Kind of going off of that, you talked some about how this experience is really vulnerable and can be isolating. So I'm wondering how or if you've found community through this.
Community? Yeah. So the first time I showed it beyond my Instagram, I had the opportunity to publish an op-ed in the New York Times, and I received such a volume of responses that I was very overwhelmed. People looking for community, people looking for help, people looking for someone to hear about their stories. I got some handwritten prayers. I don't know. That felt like something where there was just such a need for more. And people in my more immediate kind of art and photography community, they make very different pictures, which I think is really cool. And they love this work and support it, but they're also not a part of this experience either. So, and I appreciate that. I'm glad we're not just talking about this all the time. I don't know. But I do like when people write to me, like a painter wrote to me and said they found my work, and then they told me why it resonated with them. And I asked what they were working on, and they told me about these paintings that they'd been making of clinical settings because of their experience. And so I think that the community comes in different ways. And I think 11 years is a long time, but hopefully there's a lot more time to figure out how that community kind of forms and how we find each other.
Well, on that note, these pictures are really soothing to me because, well, they're not a podcast, so there's no noise, right? So they're as loud or quiet as you want them to be as you look at them. To me, they're very, very quiet. My Infusion Center is so freaking loud.
So is this one.
I'm so happy to go there. I'm going to get my medication. My pain's going to go away for a few more weeks. And I get there, and it's this onslaught. And then there'll be moments where it's quiet. And all of these I look at, they're so quiet and so soothing to me. And I put myself in some of them. Like, yes, that's the experience I want. But now you're saying it is really loud in yours too. It's such a nuisance to go to this healing center and everybody's just screeching. And I get resentful about how much socializing they're doing. I'm like, shh.
Yeah,
I'm not here to socialize. It's not the club.
I know.
But for some people, maybe it is their version of the club, and so it's good. But yeah, the quietness is really nice for me to look at these.
I think it was that one where there was a woman who's Russian, and she had a Russian TV channel on. She was on the phone on speaker talking to someone in Russian, and then I think there was a radio somewhere also Russian, and like the volume level, you know. But now I go to a place where it's like they play smooth jazz. The snacks are better. But it's interesting because, yeah, I think while I'm working, I'm able to disassociate. Or like kind of silence all of that other stuff. It feels like I'm taking back some of the time rather than it just being sort of, I don't know, I'm trying to not have a poor choice of words. Rather than it being other time, more waiting.
Any more questions?
Yeah.
The more I look at these, the more it appears that you're like stuck in a web and trying to escape. And I was wondering if you've gotten better at navigating the line coming to you, the complications of moving around while plugged in.
Maybe.
Or if that impacts the pictures that you make or not, or to what degree?
So I stopped getting the IV in the antecubital. Any doctors here? Okay.
No scar tissue, that means in the bend of your elbow.
Yeah, thanks. I stopped getting it there because I would get really freaked out every time I'd move around. And so when I had it in my hand, I felt like that untangled me a lot. But that was pretty early on. I think the obstacles are often just trying to be as respectful of the people around me as I can be. The obstacle isn't so much the IV line. And then realizing I can't bring the view camera again. Because I'd seen pictures made by someone using an 8x10, photographing themselves getting infusions, but what I didn't know, not that this makes it any simpler, but they were doing it at home. So I think in terms of friction, it's a different thing. But after doing that, I'm like, they're nuts. The pictures are good, but that is really hard. Also, metering, the light is changing all the time. Anyhow. Anita, do you have any questions? Okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you all so much.